Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 28 based on novel. So let's start. A certain little house in the outer mountains. Dressed entirely in white, Lu Feng was seated inside a stone pavilion as the surrounding Genesis chi surged over, transforming into white smoke that flowed into his body through his nose. The sound of rushing wind was heard behind him, causing Lu Feng to open his eyes, only to find a young man in blue robes standing behind him. The youth's eyes were long and narrow, and seemed to smile all the time. But there was a blade-like feeling from his smile that made no one dare to look directly at him. The young man in blue robes was called Yang Xiao, and was also an influential figure amongst the Outer Mountain disciples. He was ranked third amongst the 10 great Outer Mountain disciples, losing only to Lu Feng and Ji Hongi. Yang Xiao grinned and said, "He, have you heard? That kid Zhu Yuan is going to compete with Zhu Feng in the ethereal form technique." Lu Feng's expression remained indifferent as he said, overestimating his abilities. Yang Xiao chuckled. "It seems that you have a lot of opinions about him." There was only calmness on Lu Feng's face as he replied, "He does not have the qualifications for me to have any opinions about him. However, he is very cunning." He deliberately approached Hongi in hopes of making use of her connections. And recently, Hongi and him have been meeting far too many times. Lu Feng's gaze lowered slightly as iciness flashed in his eyes. "He truly is not tactful at all. I had warned him after all," muttered Lu Feng to himself. Upon hearing Lu Feng's words, Yang Xiao grinned and said, "That kid is rather unfortunate to have caught your attention." Lu Feng indifferently said, "But it seems that there is no need for me to act. Although Zhu Yu is only a black sash disciple, he has still managed to enter the inner mountains, and even if it is only an ethereal form technique match, he should still be able to steamroll that kid. Zhu Yu doesn't really have much ability. It's been years, but is still only a black sash disciple." Yang Xiao's tone was full of contempt towards Zhu Yu. Lu Feng glanced at the former. "Do not underestimate him. Zhu Yu is very cunning, and has likely concealed his abilities." He raised his head and looked towards a certain direction, in the outer mountains as iciness and disdain appeared in his eyes. "When Zhu Yu crushes that arrogant kid, he should learn to be a little more well-behaved, right? To think that a peasant prince from some remote continent dares to steal my woman." The corners of Lu Feng's mouth curled as he said to Yang Xiao, "When the date of the match arrives, we'll also go watch the entertainment." For the next few days, the training sessions by the creek was not put on hold. Zhu Yuan still continued to help everyone unblock their apertures. The only difference was that he was spending the majority of his time immersed in his own training. By the creek, the numerous disciples often looked towards Zhu Yuan with complicated expressions. They could sense that Zhu Yuan seemed to be trying his best to make every last second count. However, when this scene fell in their eyes, it undoubtedly made them feel that Zhu Yuan was not confident. Hence, they could only lament continuously inside. After all, the progress while training here was just too delightful. The thought that they would lose it all in a few days only made them more depressed. After another training session ended, the numerous disciples slowly dispersed, while Ji Hongi walked to Zhu Yuan's side and said, "Hey, you've not been looking too good these past 2 days." She could also sense that Zhu Yuan had become much more silent during the past 2 days, his entire being seemingly tensed up as if feeling an immense pressure from Zhu Yu. Zhu Yuan slowly opened his eyes and smiled somewhat helplessly. "Zhu Feng has such a huge head start on my in the ethereal form technique. Of course I have to speed up my training." A hasty last-minute effort. Ji Hongi's red lips curled downwards. She hesitated for a moment, before she said in a low voice, "How about I help out? I can find someone to transfer Zhu Yu back to the inner mountains." Her old ancestor was the master of the Hongya Peak, someone with extremely high status. As long as he were to open his mouth, transferring an inner mountain disciple would not be difficult. Zhu Yuan was somewhat surprised as he glanced at Ji Hongi, unable to stop himself from grinning as he said, "Don't you hate those who go through the back door the most?" He recalled that at the very beginning, Ji Hongi had been exceedingly unfond of him, because she had been under the impression that he had relied on his relations to become a first-class disciple. Now, this same prideful Ji Hongi was actually willing to help him pull strings. This was something that Zhu Yuan was extremely surprised by. Ji Hongi's pretty face involuntarily blushed when she heard this. Soon after, She glared daggers at Zhu Yuan as she said, I'm only doing this out of consideration for the numerous outer mountain disciples who are learning the ethereal form technique. Since you have the capability, you are naturally the most suitable person for this role. Why should you be replaced? Furthermore, you've promised to help me reach the second level of the ethereal form technique. If the right to teach is stripped from you, what will I do? Zhu Yuan began to laugh, his opinion towards Jiyu Hongyi growing a little more favorable. However, he waved his hand and said, Thank you for your good intentions, but it will be best for me to resolve this matter myself. If her were to rely on Jiyu Hongyi's connections, it would surely affect her reputation once word of it spread. Emir Zhu Yu did not have the qualifications to force him to rely on a girl's connections. Jiyu Hongyi softly snorted. I'll see how long you can continue to be stubborn. Though her mouth said so, she gave a tiny sigh of relief in her heart. Though she could empathize if Zhu Yuan had agreed, she would likely also be disappointed. The young man before her may seem quite kind and good-looking when he smiled, but the pride inside his bones did not lose to anyone else. Then you'd better train hard. I do want to see how far you can push the ethereal form technique during these few days. With a twist of her tiny waist, Jiyu Hongyi turned around, her red figure akin to an escaping bundle of fire. 5 days gradually passed under the expectant gazes of the many outer mountain disciples. On the morning of the 5th day, a ray of sunlight broke through the thick layers of clouds, shining on the unbroken mountain range. The outer mountains that had been silent for a night suddenly began to burst into activity and noise at this moment. Countless figures rose into the sky on their Genesis Chi, heading towards a certain giant mountain. Before one of the houses, a fully dressed Zhu Yu walked out the door, where Zhu Feng was already waiting. Zhu Feng looked towards Zhu Yu, who was in glowing spirits, and said, Elder brother, we'll finally be able to resolve all of our grievances today. Zhu Yu's expression remained unchanged, his eyes narrowing slightly as he gazed towards a certain creek in the outer mountains. In the end, a sneer of contempt appeared from the corners of his mouth as he rose into the sky with a stomp. Let's go. After today, I'll make it such that Zhu Yuan will no longer dare to utter the 3 words ethereal form technique. A majestic, lush mountain stood amongst the mountain range of the outer mountains. Today, a seemingly endless stream of Genesis Chi light figures descended from the sky at the foot of this verdant mountain, breaking its peace and serenity by filling the area with excitement and noise. Today was the day of the match between Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu, and the venue was this very mountain. This was why it had become the focal point of the outer mountains. After all, there had never been a competition between an outer mountain disciple and an inner mountain disciple for so many years, hence, even a mere Genesis technique-based match had managed to draw everyone's eyes. A dozen or so figures descended from the sky, landing just outside the Green Mountain. They immediately drew gaze after gaze filled with respect, because the one that led them was Lu Feng, dressed in his usual white clothes. There was no one who did not know Lu Feng's name in the outer mountains. Everyone acknowledged him as the strongest amongst this batch of outer mountain disciples. One could imagine how great his prospects were for the future even in a place like the Zhangshuan sect. The one at Lu Feng's side wearing blue robes also drew everyone's attention. The fact that Yang Xiao was able to be ranked 3rd amongst the 10 great outer mountain disciples was enough to show his strength and talent. The group of them basically stood at the peak of the outer mountain disciples. Hence why numerous other mountain disciple cast respectful gazes over at their arrival. In response to this gazes, Lu Feng's expression remained apathetic. His eyes scanned the area, eventually coming to a stop nearby. It was where Jiyu Hongyi and Han Xiushui were standing shoulder to shoulder. Both young ladies had slender, sexy figures that could stir the soul, drawing quite a number of gazes towards them. Han Xiushui nudged Jiyu Hongyi's slender waist and said, Hey, Lu Feng's looking at us. Jiyu Hongyi glared at her, before sweeping a cold gaze at Lu Feng. Upon seeing her look over, a gentle smile appeared on the latter's cold, prideful and handsome face. A glance was all Jiyu Hongyi took before withdrawing her gaze, frowning slightly as she looked towards a certain direction. Time slowly flowed as more and more disciples arrived, causing the place to turn increasingly lively. All of a sudden, 2 streams of light descended from the sky, landing at the foot of the mountain. The appearance of these 2 figures instantly drew countless gazes, because the one in front was one of the main actors for today, Zhu Yu. Zhu Yu stood with his hands behind his back, his expression indifferent. Not long after Zhu Yu's appearance, the sound of rushing wind was heard. The crowd watched as Zhu Yuan and Yao Yao flew over, also landing at the foot of the mountain. Now that the two leads were here, the atmosphere immediately heated up. A cloud of Genesis Chi drifted over in the sky, Chen Yuan seated atop it. He beamed as he looked towards Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu, an indescribable luster in his eyes as he said, "The both of you should already know that the loser of this match will lose the right to teach other disciples the ethereal form technique. Do either of you have any objections?" Zhu Yu shot an icy look at Zhu Yuan and said, "No objections." Zhu Yuan sneered in his heart. These two had secretly came up with this competition without informing him nor asking for his opinion. Asking such a question now was truly a joke. Hence, he merely swept a glance at Chen Yuan, ignoring the question. Upon seeing this, Chen Yuan chuckled softly as he secretly remarked to himself, "Arrogant brat. I'll be waiting to see you cry later." Hence, he spoke again, "I shall oversee this match. I believe it will be better for me to oversee it instead." Just as his voice faded, however, an elderly voice interjected. Chen Yuan frowned, a stern gaze immediately turning towards the direction where the voice had come from. "Who dares?" Before he could finish, however, his words froze at his mouth. He had seen an elder in grey seated on a tree nearby wearing a nonchalant expression. Elder Zhong Ming. Chen Yuan's rigid face stretched to form a smile, as he hurriedly cupped his hands together. "Why didn't Elder inform me so I can come and receive you?" Asterisk. The surrounding mountain forests broke out into waves of noise. Amazement in the eyes of numerous outer mountain disciples, as they looked towards the elder in grey. The most senior person they had seen since coming to the outer mountains had been Chen Yuan. They had of course heard that there were two elders in the outer mountains, but the likes of them did not have the qualifications to meet such individuals. Who could have expected one of the elders would voluntarily show himself, and even oversee the match between two disciples? The elder in grey glanced at Chen Yuan and said in an indifferent voice, "If I still did not appear, you might have forgotten that there's someone above you." Cold sweat appeared on Chen Yuan's head. His lips moved, but he did not dare to say anything. Elder Zhong Ming did not elaborate in front of the numerous disciples, but merely said, "I shall oversee this match. Do you have any complaints?" Chen Yuan hurriedly said, "I won't dare. Having Elder oversee the match is naturally the most fair choice." His gaze secretly swept towards Zhu Yu below. The latter was also stunned by this turn of events, but his gaze soon flickered for a moment as he regained his cool. This kid's luck is pretty good. To think he even managed to draw out Elder Zhong Ming. Zhu Yu's eyes were cold. He and Chen Yuan had originally planned for the latter to oversee the match, allowing him to secretly making things difficult for Zhu Yuan such that he would have no chance at all. However, it seems that these methods could no longer be used. Even so, Zhu Yu did not really care, because they were only one of his many contingencies. Zhu Yuan cupped his fists together and asked, "Elder Zhong Ming, how will we be competing in this match?" The other disciples curiously looked over. They too wanted to know what kind of match it would be. After all, the ethereal form technique was not like offensive techniques, which could be judged based on power. Zhong Ming softly chuckled. The essence of the ethereal form technique lies in two areas: speed and neutralization power. Zhu Yuan gave a faint nod. The technique allowed one to etherealize the body, causing one's speed to rise to a level that ordinary people would find difficult to match. The ethereal form technique also gave the ability to neutralize any force that struck the body, making these two aspects the essence of the technique. Hence, today's match will be based on your speed and neutralization power in the ethereal form. Zhong Ming gazed at the majestic green mountain before him as he suddenly took a deep breath before abruptly blowing. The breath of Genesis Chi that emerged was akin to the Milky Way. It swept through the air, completely covering the green mountain. Boundless Genesis Chi whizzed about the mountain like a million astral winds, booing and hissing. A faint but enormous pressure spread from it. Everyone watched this scene in shock. A breath of Genesis Chi from the elder could be said to be earth-shaking. Such power was practically immeasurable. This mountain has already been enveloped by my Genesis Chi. Once you enter, you will be exposed to my Genesis Chi pressure, making you feel as if you are carrying a mountain on your back. Besides this, the astral winds my Genesis Chi has turned into will attack you. You will be unable to avoid, and can only bear the attacks with your bodies. This will reveal how much power your ethereal form can neutralize. Zhong Ming grinned. The numerous disciples cried out in shock when they heard this. To reach the peak, the two of them would have to rely on their speed while neutralizing the astral winds. It was a very appropriate test for the ethereal form technique. How about it? Do the two of you feel this is fair? Zhongming looked towards Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu. A serious look appeared on both their faces, but they still nodded in the end. Since the two of you have no objections. Zhongming waved his sleeve as two paths opened at the foot of the mountain, before his voice sounded like thunder. Let the match begin. Let us see which of you is more adept at the ethereal form technique. Genesis Chi astral winds wreaked havoc on the lush, green mountain, like blades made from wind as they swept past, shredding even the air to pieces. Under the countless watching gazes, Zhu Yuan and Zhu Feng stood at the foot of the mountain. The two looked at each other, iciness appearing in their eyes. Zhu Yuan, I admit that you have some talent. In a few more years, you will likely have a place in the Tsangshuan sect. Zhu Yu's eyes were ice cold. Soon after, he let out an icy chuckle as he said, however, your mistake was to hop out now. The current you still does not have the qualifications. Zhu Yuan laughed and responded, you can save these words for when you reach the peak before me. Stubborn fool. Zhu Yu shook his head, mockery flashing in his eyes. Rumble. A split second later, robust Genesis Chi simultaneously erupted from Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu's bodies. The two transformed into flashes of light, as they charged into the green mountain enveloped by berserk Genesis Chi. The instant they entered, Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu's figures paused slightly. It was due to the suppression from Elder Zhongming's Genesis Chi, making the air akin to a quagmire. The movements ordinary individuals who entered would be greatly restricted, making it difficult for them to advance. Ethereal form! Shouted Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu. Nearly half of their figures began to gradually etherealize under the crowd's watching gazes as their speed rapidly rose. Fast as lightning. A series of gasps rang out in the vicinity of the Green Mountain, clearly shocked by the speed Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu had displayed. Although the ethereal form technique is only at the mid-grade Little Heaven tier, it does have its merits. Yang Xiu's eyes narrowed, smiling as he observed the rapidly moving figures on the mountain. Lu Feng's expression remained indifferent. No matter how fast they run, they will only be rabbits, still merely prey in the eyes of a real predator. Who do you think will win? Asked Yang Xiu. Lu Feng uncaringly replied, it will depend on how much Zhu Yu has concealed his abilities. While the two were conversing, the two figures on the mountain seemed to leave behind a trail of mist as they advanced. It was at this moment that the Genesis Chi that enveloped the mountain began to rear its fangs. Genesis Chi darted forth, transforming into countless glowing Genesis Chi knives. These knives seemed to cover the sky and land as they swiftly descended upon the two figures. Zhu Yuan and Zhu Feng were unable to dodge, having no choice but to receive the attacks with their bodies. Therefore, in a short span of a dozen breaths, fresh blood began to appear on their bodies, cut after cut appearing one after another. Even so, anyone could see that Zhu Yuan and Zhu Feng had used the etherealized parts of their bodies to receive the attacks. Although their bloody appearances looked extremely miserable, the majority of the force had been neutralized by the ethereal form technique. From start to end, their figures were neck to neck. In the short span of a few minutes, the duo had already reached the halfway point. Even till now, however, both parties were still equal. Zhu Yu's gaze swept across Zhu Yuan from the corner of his eyes. Soon after, iciness flashes in his eyes as the corners of his lips lifted slightly. It's time to show you the difference between us. Rumble. With a thought, the apertures in his body instantly lit up. In a short few breaths, the number of apertures in his body rose from 30 plus to 45. He had clearly begun to reveal his hidden strength. As more and more apertures were opened, everyone saw Zhu Yu's body grow more and more ethereal as faint mists began to spread around it. His speed soared, overtaking Zhu Yuan in a single breath. His body met the innumerable Genesis Chi knives head-on as he rocketed towards the peak. Zhu Yu's sudden explosion of speed instant drew numerous gasps from the surroundings of the mountain. As expected, he has concealed his strength. Numerous disciples sighed in amazement. They could naturally sense that Zhu Yu's ethereal form had grown even more formidable. Ji Yu Hongyi's hands began to clench tightly, her teeth biting into her red lips as she stared at the figure that had fallen behind. Han Qiushui could not help but remark from the side, it's over for him Hongyi. Zhu Yu's mastery of the ethereal form is much greater than Zhu Yuan's. From the looks of it, Zhu Yuan's first-level mastery was practically unable to compare to Zhu Yu. Ji Yu Hongyi did not speak, merely continuing to stare. She believed that Zhu Yuan would not lose so easily. Somewhere else, Shen Wanjin, Xiao Xiu, Xiao Qianxian and the rest anxiously watched the widening gap between the two individuals of the mountain, their eyes filled with worry. Go little Yuan bro. But there was nothing they could do besides sending out prayer after prayer in their hearts. You were so arrogant previously, but you shall now have a taste of what it feels like to eat a rotten fruit. There was a look of ecstasy mixed with excitement in Zhu Feng's eyes when he saw this. Soon after, he began to laugh. Sighs rang out in the vicinity of the mountain, pained looks on the faces of the disciples that practiced the ethereal form technique. Even more disciples, however, were enjoying the show, happy to see Zhu Yuan being suppressed. After all, if Zhu Yuan performed too outstandingly, the rest of them would appear useless in comparison. Elder Zhong Ming sat on a tree, as he looked towards the now leaving Zhu Yu, before turning to Zhu Yuan. The former's eyes suddenly squinted as he mumbled, the apertures in this kid's body. From the looks of it, he would never be able to catch up. Numerous disciples shook their heads inside. As expected, there was no point to this match at all. No matter how talented Zhu Yuan was, he had only been learning the ethereal form technique for a month. What about Zhu Yu? Nearly 2 years. However, there were some sharper disciples that suddenly remarked in uncertainty, Zhu Yuan's speed seems to be getting faster and faster. The moment these words were heard, the crow began to closely observe. Sure enough, they discovered that Zhu Yuan's speed was rising little by little. Although it was not as explosive as Zhu Yu's earlier burst, the increase was extremely stable. Thus the apertures in his body are being unblocked one by one, said someone in shock. They could just barely make out dots of light appearing and linking one after another on Zhu Yuan's body. Such a sight was not foreign to those who practiced the ethereal form technique. It was an indication that an aperture had been unblocked. Elder Zhong Ming let out an amused chuckle when he saw this. His perceptive abilities were naturally extraordinary, and had managed to discover the truth with a single look. Zhu Yuan's apertures were likely already unblocked by him, but had not been properly linked up due to the lack of time. As such, when his Genesis Chi began to circulate, the apertures would be connected one by one. Under the countless astonished gazes, more and more light dots appeared on Zhu Yuan's body, while his speed also grew faster and faster. Mist began to surge around him, as if was riding on a cloud. Every gaze was tightly fixed on the faintly discernible light dots on Zhu Yuan's body. Each one represented a newly linked aperture. There's already 43 apertures. Gasps would sound out from time to time, the numerous disciples stupefied. No one had expected Zhu Yuan's mastery to have also reached such a high level. Moreover, the aperture light dots were still increasing. After a dozen breaths, it reached 48. A number that had already surpassed Zhu Yu. Hence, a large portion of Zhu Yuan's body began to etherealize, faint mist spreading from within as his speed soared to the limits. The countless astral wind knives that shot towards him ending up passing straight through his body, only leaving behind tiny sprinkles of blood. Zhu Yuan's figure once again appeared a dozen or so feet behind Zhu Yu, rapidly catching up. Countless cries of amazement rang out in the surroundings of the mountain. No one had imagined that Zhu Yuan would really catch up. God damn it! Zhu Yu was naturally able to detect the piercing sound of rushing wind behind him. A gaze swept to his back from the corner of his eye, fury appearing within his eyes, when he saw the rapidly approaching Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yu took in a deep breath, as he made a seal with one hand. One could only watch as apertures also began to light up on his body. Zhu Yuan, did you believe that 45 apertures is my limit? With a low howl, the dot after dot began to light up on his body. It was obvious that Zhu Yu had been forced to use his full power. Two figures bolted up the mountain like lightning, while also appearing akin to two clouds. Many disciples could only barely make out the two blurry figures within. Everyone's eyes were wide open, watching the race without blinking. Zhu Yu's apertures has already reached 54. Zhu Yuan's has also risen above 50. This is way too crazy. Countless whispers emerged. Shock was apparent on everyone's faces, as they watched the two figures persistently nipped at each other's heels. Only a third of the distance was left to the peak. No one had expected such a neck-to-neck race. Zhu Yu's lead had already been forcibly taken back inch by Zhu Yuan. Zhu Yu's expression turned extremely dark and stormy at this moment. Zhu Yuan's stubbornness had already exceeded his expectations. All 58 of my apertures are already opened, a strength that I have concealed for a long time. It had originally been for the sake of stealing the limelight during the seven-peak martial meet. So I never imagined that my hand would be forced today. Zhu Yu violently gritted his teeth. Most importantly, even his full power was unable to crush Zhu Yuan. Instead, it was as if he was tenaciously holding on to the former's tail. Zhu Yuan, you forced me to do this. No matter how great of a price I'll have to pay, I will crush you beneath my heel. Zhu Yu knew that he would definitely be mocked if he lost to Zhu Yuan and returned to the inner mountains. Hence, the former had to grab victory at any cost. A resolute look appeared in Zhu Yu's eyes. With a deep breath, a scarlet pill was rolled out from under his tongue, before being swallowed into his stomach. Once the scarlet pill entered Zhu Yu's stomach, a surge of heat exploded from within it, like magma as it frantically flowed through his channels. This pill was known as the level breaker pill, and was said to have the effect of temporarily raising the power of one's genesis techniques. There were some negative repercussions, however, though the current Zhu Yu clearly could not be bothered by such things to achieve victory. He knew that he would likely lose all face if he lost to Zhu Yuan here. Therefore, he absolutely could not lose. Scarlet red surfaced in Zhu Yu's eyes as an evil look flashed within them. In the next instant, his speed abruptly soared, a flash of red faintly visible in the mists swirling around his body. In a short few breaths, he had widened the lead once again. With the level breaker pill, Zhu Yu's speed was now comparable to the ethereal form technique, with over 60 apertures unblocked. An uproar once again swept through the surroundings of the Green Mountain, everyone stunned by Zhu Yu's sudden explosion of speed. No one had expected him to have concealed his abilities so deeply. It's truly hopeless now. The crowd shook their heads. Zhu Yu's explosion of speed this time was just too frightening. His figure had practically become mist, the sky full of astral wind knives unable to stop him for even a split second. This level of mastery was already fast approaching the second level. Han Qiushui's mouth hung wide open as she involuntarily muttered, "Has Zhu Yu's mastery already reached such heights?" Ji Yu Hongyi frowned deeply, somewhat uncertain. Although she had felt that Zhu Yu was hiding his abilities, had he really hidden them to such an extent? The current level of Zhu Yu's ethereal form was already very close to the second level. The situation did indeed look extremely bad for Zhu Yuan. Why does it suddenly seem as if Zhu Yu is on steroids? Yelled Shen Wanjin, his eyes filled with worry. Just as Zhu Yuan had been about to surpass Zhu Yu, the latter suddenly released another burst of speed. Moreover, the sharp acceleration this time was basically despairing. Xiao Xiu sighed regretfully. It has not been easy for junior brother Zhu Yuan to reach this level. He's only spent so much time on the ethereal form technique after all. If he had more time, reaching the second level would have been just around the corner. Nearby, Yaoiro's eyebrows also knitted together slightly when she saw this scene. On the tree, Elder Zhongming's indifferent gaze merely swept of Zhu Yu as a bright light fitted past the depths of his eyes, clearly detecting something. His hand began to rise, and just as he was intending to speak, he suddenly let out a soft cry of surprise. His gaze was currently looking towards Zhu Yuan, who had now been left far behind, as a look of interest appeared in his eyes. At this very moment, he could sense that the Genesis Chi in Zhu Yuan's body had begun to ripple violently. Evidently, Zhu Yuan did not intend to give up just because Zhu Yu had suddenly rocketed ahead. On the mountain, Zhu Yuan's figure was akin to lightning. No panic appeared on his face as he gazed at the figure to his front that was rapidly pulling ahead. Instead, he took in a deep breath of cold air. The swelling pain from the spirit between his brows was growing more and more intense. It was an indication that the spirit was about to ascend from the perfect illusory stage to the corporeal stage. The truth was that he had felt his spirit was on the verge of a breakthrough during these past few days. For the sake of stability, however, he had slightly suppressed it. And now was finally the time for it to be released. His spirit sat between his brows with the Saint Spirit crystal revolving above it. Holy light spread from the crystal that continuously tempered the spirit. At this current time, the spirit's illusory figure was gradually becoming corporeal, looking almost as if it was solid matter. In addition, Zhu Yuan's spirit power was rising at an alarming speed. Invisible spirit power shuddered around Zhu Yuan's body, seemingly whipping up a storm. In that very instant, Zhu Yuan suddenly felt his senses grow even sharper, all things around him appearing even clearer than before, while also allowing him to better see their source. Even the mist wrapped Zhu Yu to his front was now within the range of his senses. Zhu Yuan, could feel a tiny flash of scarlet-red light in the mists surrounding Zhu Yu, faintly pulsing in a berserk manner. So that's what happened. Iciness flooded Zhu Yuan's eyes. Zhu Yu's sudden burst in speed was likely due to some kind of pill that had forcibly strengthened the ethereal form technique. Is this the corporeal stage? Zhu Yuan's eyes were clear and calm, but this was not the time for him to discover the wonders of the corporeal stage. With a thought, the Saint Rune between his brows flowed down into his pupils. Decode a Saint Rune. A low shout sounded in Zhu Yuan's heart, as the ancient Saint Rune slowly began to revolve in the depths of his pupils. A peculiar power abruptly erupted, immediately giving him a clear view of his entire body. After reaching the corporeal stage, the activated Decoder Saint Rune had grown even more detailed and effective. Under the probing of the Decoder Saint Rune, Zhu Yuan could faintly see dot after dot of light suddenly begin to emerge. There were a total of 14 light dots. Currently, 58 apertures had already been unblocked in Zhu Yuan's body. If these 14 were added, it just nicely added up to 72. 72 unblocked apertures meant that one had truly stepped into the second level of the ethereal form technique. Although it would be safer to unblock them one by one, it seems that I have no choice but to do them all at one go, mumbled Zhu Yuan to himself. The Genesis Chi in his body began to churn violently, eventually whizzing through his channels as it charged towards the 14 apertures in succession. Apertures were easily unblocked wherever his Genesis Chi passed. All 14 apertures were threaded together by Genesis Chi in a short few breaths. 72 apertures were now completely unblocked. Although the 14 new apertures had yet to be polished and infused with mist essence, Zhu Yuan's ethereal form technique had now just barely reached the second level. And this was already enough. Zhu Yuan raised his gaze, looking towards the figure that was zooming towards the peak, as a certain angle slowly rose from the corners of his mouth. Zhu Yu, I'll show you what the true second level looks like. With a stomp of his foot, the space around him shook. Countless gazes in the vicinity of the mountain looked over in shock and astonishment. Zhu Yuan's body was gradually etherealizing, seemingly transforming into a figure made from mist. At a cursory glance, one would only be able to see a blurry silhouette. A storm of noise immediately exploded. What? Zhu Yuan's entire body has etherealized. How can that be? One needs to be at the second level to achieve that state. Although it's quite impossible, the facts are staring right at us. My God! Overwhelmed voices sounded one after another, everyone completely stupefied as they gazed upon the fully mist-like figure. Han Xiushui had covered her mouth with her hands, shock coloring her entire face. Beside her, Jiyu Hongyi's eyes flickered with a resplendent light as emotions surged in her heart. Little Yuan bro is awesome, uttered a dazed Shen Wanjin. Xiao Xiu also swallowed time and time again. This guy. Yang Xiu's expression had turned rather serious. Next to him, although Lu Feng did not say anything, his eyes had narrowed slightly. The current Zhu Yuan gave him a faint feeling of danger. Under the countless shocked gazes across the area, Zhu Yuan's body fully etherealized. His toes pushed off the ground as he transformed into a blurry figure that shot forward at an astonishing speed. Every gaze in the area was focused on a single thing. Zhu Yuan, fully ethereal figure, shot forth, like a shadow, as a seemingly entire sky's worth of Genesis Chi knives continuously swept past his body. This time, however, the knives seemed to be piercing through mist, unable to amount to much of a hindrance or do any harm to Zhu Yuan. The second level of the ethereal form technique had allowed Zhu Yuan's body to turn completely ethereal. He was now akin to a bundle of mist, ungraspable and formless. His speed had also rose to an alarming level. Numerous disciples could only see a blur shoot past, unable to make out Zhu Yuan's figure. In the short span of a dozen breaths, the gap between Zhu Yuan and Zhu Yu rapidly shrunk. The activity from behind was also detected by Zhu Yu at this moment. His gaze swept back, only to be scared stuff, horror and disbelief filling his eyes. How is this possible? How can his body fully etherealize? Howls of terror and shock rang out in Zhu Yu's heart. How could it not know that the full etherealization of the body was a mark of stepping in the second level of the ethereal form technique? Which was to say, Zhu Yuan had already unblocked 72 apertures. But how could this be? How long had Zhu Yuan practiced the ethereal form technique? Was his talent really at such a monstrous level? Although Zhu Yu had borrowed the power of the level breaker pill to forcibly raise the level of his ethereal form technique, it was for one only temporary second. It had only allowed him to come very close to the second level of the ethereal form technique. There was still a gap between this and the true second level. Zhu Yu's face began to warp and distort, evidently overwhelmed by this information. Impossible. Absolutely impossible. It must be some kind of trick, howled Zhu Yu in his heart. The Genesis Qi in his body quickly began to circulate even faster, pouring all of its power into the ethereal form technique, as he frantically dashed towards the peak. The peak was almost within reach, and he had to reach it first at any cost. If not, he would surely become a laughing stock. Zhu Yu became quicker and quicker, as if squeezing out every ounce of his potential, as he headed straight towards the peak. When the numerous gazes saw that Zhu Yu was about to reach the peak, their hearts leaped to their throats, clearly very anxious. I'm going to win. As long as I reach the peak first, I will have won this match. Zhu Yu's eyes were tightly glued to the rapidly approaching peak. At this current time, nothing else could enter his eyes. The peak grew closer and closer. 100 feet, 60 feet, 30 feet, 10 feet. An almost crazed smile slowly began to emerge from the corners of his lips as the tree at the peak was reflected in his eyes. No matter what happened, he would be able to take everything back as long as he won this match. So what if you have insane talent? I'm the one who will be winning this match. However, when he was only a few feet from the peak, he suddenly heard the piercing sound of rushing wind behind him. The corners of his eyes twitched as his gaze swept to his back, causing his entire body to turn cold as he saw a blurry ethereal figure rapidly approach from behind as if riding on a cloud. In the end, the figure brushed past him in a single step. Their gazes seemed to meet in that very moment. However, Zhu Yu's was filled with terror, while Zhu Yuan's remained chilly, not even the slightest ripple to be seen. No. A cry of misery erupted from Zhu Yu's mouth. But Zhu Yuan's ethereal figure had already taken the next step, reaching the peak of the majestic verdant mountain as countless gasps and cries sounded. At the peak was a giant boulder on which Zhu Yuan now stood. His ethereal body gradually returned to normal as he looked down from above, the view of the countless figures dotting the surroundings of the mountain entering his eyes. The instant Zhu Yuan stood on the peak, Zhu Yu's body stiffened. He stood there, merely a few feet from Zhu Yuan, a dull look in his eyes and his face deathly pale. He never imagined that he would actually lose. In the air, Chen Yuan's expression had also turned a little ugly at this scene. The corners of his mouth twitched as he cursed inside, useless trash. This outcome had also exceeded his expectations. Whoa! The vicinity of the mountain was silent for an instant before cries of surprise swept across the sky and land. Stunned looks could be seen on every disciple. They too had not expected the ultimate winner to be Zhu Yuan. An outer mountain disciple had beaten an inner mountain disciple in a Genesis technique match. This was something that had never happened before in the Zhangxuan sect. The sight of the young figure that stood atop the peak made even the proud Xingju disciple click their tongues in wonder at this moment. Although they were somewhat unwilling to accept it, the young man from a remote continent had indeed obtained a beautiful victory today. Wow, this guy is a little too amazing. Han Xiushui's hands were cupping her pretty face, a tiny trace of admiration in her watery eyes, as she dazedly stared at Zhu Yuan's figure. After all, they clearly understood how difficult it was to win an inner mountain disciple even in a Genesis technique match. Ji Yu Hong's snow-whitey chin nodded faintly, a slight smile flowing out from the corners of her lips. Zhu Yuan's performance was indeed breathtaking. On the huge tree, Zhongming stood up and moved, appearing directly at the peak. His gaze swept across the deathly pale Zhu Yu as he announced, "The winner of this match is Zhu Yuan. From today onwards, Zhu Yuan will have the right to teach the ethereal form technique, while Zhu Yu will be stripped of his ethereal form technique instructor status. You shall return to the inner mountains tomorrow." Zhongming looked towards Zhu Yu and indifferently said, "Besides this, you broke the rules during the match, so make sure to receive your punishment at the disciplinary hall." He had obviously caught Zhu Yu using a pill during the match. Zhu Yu's body shook as his complexion paled even further. In the end, his legs turned to jelly as he crumpled to the ground. He never imagined that he would face such a complete defeat this time. As Zhongming's voice sounded across the mountains, numerous cheers began to erupt from the surroundings. The disciples that were hoping to receive tutelage from Zhu Yuan even more excited and elated. The other disciples sighed inside. Zhu Yuan was going to become famous after this match. It was likely that no one in the entire outer mountains would continue to look down on him. Yang Xiu looked towards Zhu Yuan with interest as he listened to the cheers that filled the skies. Soon after, he sighed and said, "He does have some ability. If it were a real fight, his speed will be rather troublesome." Lu Feng's expression remained indifferent. He looked towards Ji Yuhongyi below, and just happened to catch sight of her looking at Zhu Yuan's figure with a smile. The former's expression immediately sunk a little. He had used numerous methods in an attempt to deepen their relationship, but there was ultimately no progress. Ji Yuhongyi did not seem to have any feelings for him. Although he did not know whether Ji Yuhongyi was really interested in Zhu Yuan, Lu Feng did not like this attitude she had towards him, because Lu Feng himself had never experienced the same thing before. Lu Feng raised his head, looking towards the figure on the peak as his expression darkened slightly. "Zhu Yuan, there are certain things that someone like you does not have the right to even think about. The most important thing for anyone is to know one's place. You had best not provoke me. This video will end here.